When I started to expose the Superfund after there was a toxic waste site in my childhood neighborhood, I ended up going off narrative. I wasn't being a good Democrat. And this led to journalists all over the country covering my story up. Intercept, Guardian, all of these liberal media outlets, all of these alleged investigative journalism outlets that would expose government corruption would not tell my story. And it was because it was very random, the reason that it happened. So I was a Democrat during these years, and it never occurred to me that asking for EPA reform was something that only a conservative would care about. You see, I thought that fighting for the environment mattered, and it didn't matter to me if someone was a conservative or a liberal. I wanted all people that were impacted by toxic waste to be educated. Of course, the Democrat narrative, the liberal narrative, is that all conservatives are anti environment. All conservatives are supporting polluters. All conservatives are destroying the earth. Yet here I am traveling across the country and I'm encountering these ground activists that are fighting the US EPA. I'm encountering these conservative communities that are standing up and fighting against EPA caused incidents. Like Ashland, Kentucky, there was a massive methane spill. And because it was caused by an EPA contractor, that story never got media, but also it never got media because it was a group of conservatives that were fighting to stop a methane spill. And so we're off narrative. So we cannot write about conservative communities that stand up and fight to expose toxic waste or to fight a toxic waste cause. Now, you see, back then I didn't look at it like that. I thought, well, no, these are human beings. It doesn't matter what their politics are. They're impacted by toxic waste. This is a community fighting for justice. So I didn't look at it from a political perspective back then. I didn't see it that way. I saw communities that had massive toxic incidents that were banding together to fight to get the toxic incidents cleaned up. And as the years went by, I realized that these were predominantly conservative communities that were fighting. Arkansas over the Diamond Pipeline, Asheville, North Carolina was Tate McQueen and the Asheville CTS. Um, there was the Tennessee coal ash spill. There was the Animas River mine spill where the mine owner actually fought to try to stop the spill and eventually got blamed for the spill, even though he bought the mine. He bought the deed for the mine when it was already polluted. And it turned out later that it was the EPA's fault that the mine had filled up with mine waste to begin with. And it was the same thing in Ashland. It was basically this green EPA contractor that caused this massive methane spill. And I started to see these conservative communities that were just fighting and fighting and fighting. And I'm going to media, I'm going to The Intercept, I'm going to The Guardian. I'm talking about EPA reform, I'm talking about Superfund, and I'm being portrayed as this far right wing nut job, this conspiracy theorist. Now, today, what's happening is that because I was fighting for conservative communities and this Democrat, Peter John Ross, was targeting me the whole time trying to protect the EPA, it's led to this blackout of coverage. And so it doesn't matter what I publish. You have to understand, it doesn't matter what evidence I publish or how many photos or how many emails or how much information I post showing that I did these causes all over the country. He'll just move the bar. He'll just establish a new set of rules every time I show evidence there'll be some reason that he'll move the bar back and then I'll be required to present something else. And that's been quite consistent with him. And so what's happened is because media outlets like New York Times and Los Angeles Times and Intercept and San Francisco Chronicle and the Pulitzer community covered up my story because I was talking about EPA corruption, because I was talking about conservatives that were fighting for the environment, I just broke the rules. I went off the approved narrative for an environmental activist and I ended up the victim of suppression. Mr. Ross today is just exploiting that fact. He's exploiting the fact that I went off narrative and that I was silenced essentially for doing what I was doing. And now he's rewriting the entire story. He's trying to erase history when it's really not possible to do so. Now, just for anybody that's involved in this, understand that Peter brought 11 people into a court of law 3 years ago, and they ferociously testified that I wasn't a filmmaker, activist, and journalist, and it resulted in a ruling which stated Matthew Burdick is a filmmaker, activist, and journalist. So they tried as hard as they could to make it look like I wasn't a filmmaker, activist, and journalist, and even the judge that hated my guts didn't buy it and determined I was one. So we're in a position where I've already been proven in a court of law to be a journalist, activist, and filmmaker. And then when you start realizing what the problems are with the story, here you have me, a Democrat, who's innocently trying to tell these stories of these communities that are fighting, to clean up toxic waste that happen to be conservative. And I'm being suppressed by journalist after journalist after journalist after journalist after journalist because why? They're all fucking Democrats. They don't want the public to know that there's another side to the story. They don't want the public to know that there's more going on in America than what they are, trying to tell everybody. And, you know, what is the result of that? Well, Donald Trump is now going for his second term. America is starting to learn that we can't trust these journalists. And so we even have something in reality happening right now where we're moving into an era where we have an entirely Republican Senate, Republican House, Republican president. They own everything. Why? Because of the media, because of journalists. Nobody believes them anymore. Obviously, their credibility is destroyed from years and years of political bias. Nobody can trust them. Nobody can trust Sharon Lerner. Nobody can trust The Intercept. Nobody can trust The Guardian. Nobody can trust any of these people anymore. That's what the message was sent to all of these people when Trump was reelected. Peter is just a guy who is exploiting the fact that I just was involved in something that was off political narrative. And I was involved in something really fucking huge all over the country in 1,000 cities. And it just got covered up and covered up and covered up and covered up and covered up. And he's exploiting that so he can rewrite history right now. And what's happened is now Donald Trump is now in for a second term. Why? Because America's figured it out. History is starting to catch up. Now the world is starting to understand that my story isn't so ridiculous. And Peter's propaganda scheme is falling apart, essentially. Now it's just these acts of desperation, and as I publish pieces of evidence which prove the story, and as you start to piece it together and realize that, between the years 2013 and 2018, I did a shit ton of activism and there's lots of evidence. As you realize that Peter's just scamming, that he's just being a bully, that he's just trying to hide what it is that he did. He's doing this all for himself. He's making it look like this is some political battle, but at the end of the day, this is all just to hide what he did. Because you have to remember, a guy like Ross only thinks of himself. And so there is no altruistic motive for what he's doing. There is no ultimate political motive for what he's doing. It when you simplify it and you boil it down, he just doesn't want to be caught for what he's been doing all over the country. This is all about him, and he makes it about the US EPA. He makes it about environmental causes. He makes it about journalism. He makes it about filmmaking. He makes it about activism. But at the end of the day, it's just about him, and everybody's his pawn. And if anybody has any questions about that, I have emails that he sent calling people pawns. And so, we are basically at the end of this story, no less, because we're about to go to court and he's about to be busted for all of this. And so this is all essentially, anybody who's getting roped into it now, it's too little too late, because now is the time for all of this to come out. And so I invested almost my whole adult life in fighting for these causes. And I'm going to continue to passionately fight for these causes, and I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to let some fat fuck in Columbus, Ohio, some fucking Democrat create this shitbag propaganda campaign, uh, you know, basically highlighting the exact reason that Trump was reelected to begin with. I mean, Peter's like a microcosm of why Trump is in office. I mean, Peter is the ultimate in Democrat disinformation. And so, all it's going to take is one filing and the right people to be sued with that filing. And Mr. Ross is systematically eliminated permanently. And he knows that. So he can do his little desperate acts and he can do his dirty deeds all he wants, but the motherfucker's finished. And the only thing left is now to get the story out, to finally tell my story to a public that will listen. It's like, you're sick of the media? Let me tell you why I'm sick of the media. Let me tell you what the media did to you and did to your family. Let me tell you what these Democrat journalists did to millions of innocent people exposed to toxic waste that still polluted Superfund sites all over the United States. Let me tell you what they did to you in the interest of you not knowing that a conservative community stood up to fight for the environment. Let me tell you what they did to you in the interest of politics. And let me tell you what this Peter John Ross guy did to you just because he got caught.